Urgent! Putin's inner circle is panicking and stopping the war. A Russian official has laid his cards on the table. Politicians have rebelled against Putin. They are in a panic. The Federation is plunging into a social collapse. Half the country's budget goes to war. The economy is at rock bottom. Deputies are now openly calling the master of the Kremlin a war criminal. How did Ukrainian drones crash the Russian economy to a 16-year low? And what harsh ultimatum did central bank head Nabiullina give to Putin? All the details of the explosive coup in the Russian Federation right now. Greetings! This is the Ukraine Today channel. I'm Andrei Silikov with breaking news from behind the scenes at the Kremlin. Vladimir Putin's inner circle and Russian politicians are sounding the alarm, demanding an immediate end to the war against Ukraine. The reputable publication, The Telegraph, reports that the elite are panicking, trying to avoid a full-scale social collapse that the Russian Federation is rapidly heading toward. In particular, State Duma deputy Vyacheslav Markayev openly criticized the Kremlin's ineffective leadership and demanded a clear plan to end the conflict.
A Russian deputy warns Putin, "We are on the brink of a social collapse." A deputy from the Communist Party slams the Kremlin's ineffective leadership and demands a plan to end the conflict in Ukraine. A Russian deputy demanded that Vladimir Putin present a plan to end the war in Ukraine, criticizing the Kremlin's ineffective leadership.
In his tirade, Markayev stated that Russia is suffering from corruption, oligarchy, regular Ukrainian drone strikes, and colossal losses of the most active and reproductive part of the population. The politician also emphasized that the time for illusions is over and directly accused the entrenched authorities of bringing the country to the brink of a social explosion. Putin has apparently pushed the situation in the country to such an absurd boiling point that people within the core of the Russian system have begun to openly and fiercely criticize him.
The time for illusions is over. The country is on the brink of a social explosion, and the blame for this will lie entirely with the entrenched ruling power. If the situation persists, social unrest and chaos will become more likely. The West will inevitably take advantage of this to destroy the remnants of Russian statehood.
This protest is far from an isolated case, as the list of public figures criticizing the dictator continues to grow. Recently, another deputy, Renat Suleimanov, called for the war to end as soon as possible, directly admitting that the Russian economy simply cannot withstand it. And former staunch Kremlin supporter Ilya Remeslo even called Putin a war criminal and a thief, demanding the president be brought to justice.
Dissatisfaction with the authorities has been simmering for the past few months. It is linked to large-scale internet outages, slow progress on the battlefield, and long-range Ukrainian strikes that have reached the very heart of Russia's two largest cities. This week, it was reported that the state-controlled All-Russian Public Opinion Research Center, VCIOM, will stop publishing an open trust rating for Putin, as it has plummeted to its lowest level since the start of the invasion.
The main reason for panic in the halls of power is the catastrophic state of the economy and record defense spending since the Cold War. In early 2026, Russia's military spending soared to 46% of the total budget, effectively swallowing two-thirds of state revenue from January to March. The situation is worsened by successful Ukrainian drone strikes on oil refineries, which bit off a huge chunk of Moscow's oil revenue and crashed refining rates to a 16-year low.
According to Dr. Janis Klug, an economist and senior fellow at the German Institute for International and Security Affairs, in early 2026, military spending rose by more than 30% compared to the previous year, reaching 46% of total budget expenditures. This means that almost every second ruble spent from the federal budget was allocated for military needs. The pace of military spending looks even more impressive and, from the Kremlin's point of view, alarming when compared to budget revenues. Military spending was equivalent to two-thirds of Russian budget revenues in the period from January to March 2026, Dr. Klug noted.
Amid looming bankruptcy, a rebellion is also brewing in the Kremlin's financial bloc. As the publication writes, the head of the Russian central bank, Elvira Nabiullina, pointedly skipped the St. Petersburg Economic Forum and a meeting with Putin, using sick leave as a cover. However, independent sources claim that she issued a harsh ultimatum to the dictator. Nabiullina will only finish her term if Putin refuses to escalate, close borders, and introduce martial law.
This week, she, along with her deputies, also decided to skip a scheduled meeting on interest rates, which involved the Russian president as well as his high-ranking ministers. It was a significant absence. Another source told the We Can Explain channel that she plans to leave the central bank soon, which would be a major shock. It is believed that the head of the central bank, who is seen as a key policymaker and has worked with Putin for nearly 2 decades, has long harbored personal doubts about the invasion and reportedly tried to resign at its very beginning. According to sources close to the Kremlin, she was ordered to remain at her post at that time.
All these failures at the front and in the economy have led to a total collapse of Russians' trust in their leader. Russia's polling center was forced to stop publishing Putin's open trust rating after it plummeted to a measly 29.5% in early April, the lowest since the invasion began. Meanwhile, Ukraine is asking allies for an additional $20 billion to finally secure its advantage on the battlefield and make Russia burn even brighter.
Everyone sees that Russia is burning, and we want it to burn even more. But for that, we need funding. An unnamed official told the publication, adding that the request will be made on June 18th at a meeting of the Ukraine Defense Contact Group.
And while Russian elites wait in panic for a social explosion, the hard numbers only confirm their worst fears. The Kremlin's war machine is breaking all historical spending records, devouring 2/3 of budget revenues amid a total collapse in tax receipts. How rapidly is the dictator bankrupting his own country to keep the war going? Find out in our report.
Russia's spending on the military-industrial complex and the army in the first quarter of 2026 compared to the same period in 2025 jumped by nearly a third. Based on data from the Russian Ministry of Finance, Janis Klug, a researcher at the German Institute for International and Security Affairs, calculated that in the first 3 months, Russia spent a record 5,900 billion rubles on the war against Ukraine. The share of military spending accounted for 46% of all federal budget expenditures. Almost every second ruble from the federal treasury went to funding the war machine. Current military spending swallowed 2/3 of the taxes collected during the quarter.
This growth was mainly driven by an increase in spending classified as secret, which rose by 43% compared to the first quarter of 2025, from 3,400 billion to 4,900 billion rubles. Total federal spending in the first quarter amounted to 12,800 billion rubles, meaning that an unprecedented 38.2% of all federal budget expenditures were classified. According to Russia's budget law for 2026, approximately 85% of classified spending is directed toward the needs of the armed forces. Janis Klug, a researcher at the Institute for International and Security Affairs.
In the first quarter, Russia spent an average of 2,700 billion rubles per hour on continuing the war against Ukraine, or 65 billion daily. This is comparable to the annual budget of the Novgorod and Oryol regions.
Since 2022, the war against Ukraine has cost Russian taxpayers 53,079 billion rubles, or $746,600 million. This amount covers 28 years of current healthcare budget spending, 30 years of education spending, and 100 annual budgets of large regions like Krasnodar Krai or Sverdlovsk Oblast, from a publication by the Moscow Times.
Russia has almost completely exhausted its financial reserves and its economy has entered a terminal stage, economists claim. International sanctions, Ukrainian long-range strikes on strategic targets in the Russian rear, and record military spending have caused the Federation's economic growth to stall and its dependence on China to increase, note the authors of a joint report by the Kiel Institute for the World Economy and the Stockholm Institute of Transition Economics. Moscow has turned into a dependent petitioner, while Beijing has gained absolute leverage over Russian supply chains for critical industrial components, electronics, and equipment.
Currently, China accounts for approximately 35% of Russia's total foreign trade volume, and it supplies the vast majority of critically important dual-use goods and military components entering the country. According to the report, China accounts for about 3/4 of the growth in imports to Russia of sanctioned, critically important military components since 2022, from a publication on the website of the Kiel Institute for the World Economy.
A new wave of defaults in the Russian corporate bond market has already matched the scale of the 2014 to 2016 crisis and has become the largest in the last decade, according to a review by the analytical company Euler. Experts attribute the situation to the slowdown of the Russian economy, a decrease in demand, and the high cost of loans for businesses.
This already speaks to the very deplorable state of key Russian companies that trade their securities. Furthermore, certainly this chain reaction has already affected the manufacturing sector. We know that many Russian companies have already been forced to switch to a 4-day and some even to a 3-day work week due to the collapse in sales volume, which through a chain reaction led to a collapse in production and the need to cut staff.
Default risks persist for companies in the construction, coal, trade, and machine-building industries. Even pro-Kremlin research centers warned that Russia's economy could enter a recession as early as the end of this year. Victoria Chistyukina for the Freedom TV channel.
And while Putin's war machine is finally bankrupting its own country, the West is launching a powerful diplomatic offensive. German Chancellor Friedrich Merz stated that the window for negotiations will open in the very near future. European ambassadors have already directly presented Moscow with tough conditions. All the details of this pressure are coming up next.
The escalation in the Middle East and Russia's war against Ukraine will be key topics of discussion at the G7 summit, which will be held in France from June 15th to 17th, Reuters reports. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky will participate in the talks in Yverdon-les-Bains, Emmanuel Macron announced.
First, there will be a meeting of the 7 leaders to discuss the main themes of international crises. Then, on Tuesday morning, we will hold a discussion on Ukraine with President Zelensky. And this is very important for us because we need to restore consensus within the G7 on the issue of supporting Ukraine in various aspects.
European leaders emphasize that it is Moscow, not Kiev, that is blocking the diplomatic process. And since the negotiations to end the war have reached a deadlock, Ukraine is striving to give them a new impetus. And Europe can play a major role in this, Volodymyr Zelensky is certain.
The main thing is that today it's very important to prepare for the negotiations and decisions we're all eagerly awaiting from the summits of the European Union, the G7 and NATO. June and July of this year could decide a great deal.
At the summit in France, European leaders will try to involve Trump in discussing an initiative for new peace talks between Ukraine and Russia, Bloomberg predicts. Kiev's partners believe the dynamics of the war have shifted and Ukraine's positions have strengthened. Russia, on the other hand, is unable to achieve any significant success on the battlefield. All of this, according to analysts, creates opportunities for a return to diplomacy. However, there are still no signs that Moscow is ready to end the war against Ukraine, noted European Commission spokesperson Anita Hipper. Negotiations are taking place in various formats in different locations and at different levels, involving heads of state, governments, ministers, senior diplomats, and officials from our side. You know our position very well. We want peace, Ukraine wants peace, so right now we're doing our best to convince Russia of the need for a genuine, long-term, and just peace. At the moment, we don't see any signs of that. That's why we're maintaining a steady and consistent course, including, for instance, with the recently adopted sanctions package, which imposes additional sanctions on Russia. The leaders of the United Kingdom, Germany and France want Russia to agree to an immediate ceasefire, using the current front line as a starting point for negotiations. It's also vital, from the perspective of Kiev's partners, to provide Ukraine with reliable security guarantees. European leaders outlined their proposals in a joint statement following the talks in London. And on June 11th, the ambassadors of the United Kingdom, Germany and France delivered the contents of this document to the Deputy Foreign Minister of the Federation, Mikhail Galuzin.
International borders must not be changed by force. Russian assets will remain frozen until Russia ends its war of aggression and pays Ukraine compensation for the damage caused by the war. It's also necessary to ensure the protection of European security interests in any agreement. From the joint statement by Volodymyr Zelensky, Keir Starmer, Emmanuel Macron and Friedrich Merz on the United Kingdom government website.
Achieving a just and lasting peace between Ukraine and Russia is a prerequisite for ensuring long-term security in the Black Sea region, stated Turkish Foreign Minister Hakan Fidan.
We believe it's vital for peace and stability in our region to use every opportunity to achieve peace between Russia and Ukraine. Turkey will continue to provide active support to the parties in this regard. We expect the earliest possible achievement of a lasting and just peace based on international law.
The Kremlin's calculations that a prolonged war would lead to Europe abandoning its support for Kyiv have not materialized. Ukraine has received the 7th tranche of funding from the European Union under the Ukraine facility, totaling €2.8 billion. The European Union has also agreed on large-scale defense and budget assistance programs for the coming years, while Kyiv continues to work with partners to expand defense cooperation. Natalia Gusak for the Freedom TV channel.
Meanwhile, as Europe takes the lead in putting pressure on Moscow, it will have to learn to defend itself on its own. The United States has already shared classified plans with NATO allies to reduce the American military presence on the continent. How are Europeans urgently changing their security architecture and preparing to manage without direct reliance on the Pentagon? Find out in our report.
NATO countries are preparing for a reduction in the presence of United States military forces on the continent. The United States plans to significantly decrease the number of its aircraft and ships in Europe. For example, the number of F-16 and F-15E fighters will be cut from 150 to 100, and they want to withdraw all tanker aircraft from Europe entirely, writes the New York Times. Maritime reconnaissance aviation will be reduced from 26 to 15 units. It is also known that the United States plans to send its cruise missile submarine and an aircraft carrier, along with escort ships, to other regions and withdraw one of two strategic bomber groups from Europe. According to experts, this will limit the ability of alliance members on the continent to conduct long-range strikes and carry out maritime reconnaissance.
While each of these reductions can be managed individually, collectively, they represent a significant shift in posture and pose challenges for the readiness of European deterrence across all domains. Giuseppe Spatafora, an expert at the European Union Institute for Security Studies, in a comment to the New York Times.
And although the exact timeline for implementing Washington's plans has not yet been announced, Europe is already deciding how to ensure security without Washington's support. According to Bloomberg, this topic was key at a meeting of the defense ministers of Poland, Germany, France, Italy, and the United Kingdom on June 12th. One of the pressing issues being discussed by the allies is countering Russian drones that violate the airspace of European nations. NATO countries plan to give the alliance's military commander more freedom of action on this issue, Politico reports. This will provide flexibility in redistributing resources within the alliance.
There were massive, well, not massive, but widespread provocations by Russia against the Baltic states and Poland using drones when several drones flew into Poland at once. And it's just that they weren't equipped with explosives. So in response to this, NATO moved there, strengthened the air defense. Air defense systems were deployed from the Netherlands. And then the French also sent their fighter jets to the area, including some versions that are actually capable of carrying nuclear weapons. Other specific actions were also taking place. So there were no official meetings convened under Article 4 or Article 5 of the NATO treaty. But instead, these particular and specific things were happening, things that truly would have been impossible without the essential support of the United States.
On June 12th, Swedish emergency response forces deployed fourth-generation Gripen multi-role fighters to intercept a Russian Su-24 tactical bomber and an Su-34 supersonic fighter bomber over the Baltic Sea. According to the Swedish armed forces, the Russian military aircraft were near Swedish airspace but did not violate it. We cannot speculate as to why they were flying there, but we consider the situation to be very serious, noted a spokesperson for the Swedish armed forces. Russia's behavior is serious and represents a recurring pattern that threatens both our territorial integrity and our security. Eva Skog-Haslum, chief of the Joint Operations Command of the Swedish Armed Forces, from a statement on the Swedish Armed Forces website. From June 16th to 26th, near the Suwalki Gap, Lithuania, Poland, and France will hold the international exercise Gallant Boar 2026 Brave Boar. The Lithuanian news portal Reuters reports that the main objective of these maneuvers is to practice joint military operations and coordinate actions between allied forces. Special attention will be focused on the skills necessary to ensure the rapid and effective defense of this critical area. Karina Loloyan for Freedom TV channel.
And what do you think about these events? Share your opinion in the comments, give us a like, and stay informed about the main news. More to come.